Go.
Hey folks, in the interest of trying to make up a little bit of the time from the first day that we missed, and also to give you a little bit of a taste of the civil rights chapter, I did want to go ahead and give you a couple of things from the outline that we would have had in class. We're running out of time, as obviously you can tell here at the end of the semester. What I wanted to focus on really in this video were going to be two amendments to the Constitution. You know, civil rights is basically the idea that there's going to be equal treatment under the law. Civil rights is basically the idea that there's going to be equal treatment under the law, and it really doesn't matter what group it is that you identify with. The group that you identify with should be treated just as equally by the government as any other group that's there. We have a tendency of thinking about this civil rights or this equal treatment being in terms of gender. We have a tendency of thinking that this is in terms of race. Maybe even we have a tendency of thinking that it's in terms of age. But there are numerous categories that are out there that indeed would necessitate this equal treatment by the government. For our purposes, to kind of get started into this chapter a little bit, what I wanted to focus on was going to be the 13th and the 15th Amendment, which are basically both going to be dealing with race. Now, when you look back on this, the United States fought a civil war a number of years back now. And one of the things that happened ultimately, and some folks, depending upon where you're from, would say it was about civil rights. Some folks would say it was about states' rights. Some folks would say it's about the abolition of slavery. And really, probably bits and pieces of all of those are there. But in the aftermath of the Civil War, after the northern states had defeated the seceding southern states, there were three amendments that were passed that were added to the United States Constitution. Cleverly enough, they were known as the Civil War Amendments, and they were the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendments. The 14th Amendment I'm going to hold off on, but the 13th and the 15th I really wanted to focus on, again, to give you a taste of some of the law that's out there. Now, the 13th Amendment, and I'll just go ahead and read this off real quick. This is straight off of actually out of the amendment. Section 1. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. When you go back and you think about it, the 13th Amendment was the amendment that ended slavery. This was the first one that was passed in the aftermath of the Civil War, and obviously, if indeed the Emancipation Proclamation had started this process, ultimately the 13th Amendment would finish this process. Now you notice in here it says slavery nor involuntary servitude. Some of you may be sports fans, and think about it like this. Let's say that you've got a favorite basketball player, since we're in the NBA playoffs right now. If the basketball player has signed a contract for 5 years to make $50 million, but maybe on year 3 or year 4, the player decides that he does not want to basically follow through with the contract because he could probably earn more money if he held out, can the team actually make him play? Well, the answer is no. And why? Because this is actually considered a form of involuntary servitude. So slavery, like we were talking about within the context of the Civil War, was abolished with the 13th Amendment. But it still has practical applications today. If you go back to the Truman case when we were talking about presidential powers, the Sawyer versus Youngstown Steel case, when you think back to that one, making those workers work against their will could conceivably have been considered involuntary servitude, again, contrary to the 13th Amendment. So keep that in mind. Baseball players, football players, they hold out. Can you force them to actually fulfill their contract? No, because once again, making them work against their will is considered involuntary servitude. Now, the 15th Amendment is a little bit different, and the 15th Amendment was actually going to be dealing with giving the freedmen the right to vote. And let me just scroll down a little bit on this. I mean, if you were going to write an amendment, where basically you were going to establish that the newly freedmen should have the right to vote, what exactly would this amendment look like? Well, I mean, in its most simplest of forms, the most simplest of forms would be something along the lines of this. The newly freedmen shall have the right to vote. I mean, when you think about it, it's very straightforward. The newly freedmen, I mean, these were going to be the slaves that were freed at the end of the Civil War. The newly freedmen shall have the right to vote. Pretty straightforward. It's very difficult to misunderstand this. Now, here's the problem, though. When they actually wrote the 15th Amendment, which gave the newly freedmen the right to vote, it didn't read like that at all. The right of the citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. The Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. Now I want you to think about this, and this sounds maybe a little bit silly, maybe even it sounds a little bit basic, but let's just compare these two. We'll put them really close together because there's a really obvious difference. When you think about it, this kind of just pulled out of our back pocket definition or amendment is giving the freedmen a positive right to vote, a concrete right to vote. The newly freedmen shall have the right to vote, no ifs, no ands, no buts. But if you read the 15th Amendment, the right to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Notice on this, the 15th Amendment is not giving anybody the right to vote, but rather what it's doing is it's telling you reasons why somebody can't be allowed to vote, reasons that you can legally deny them. In this one, there's no denying. You've got the right. Down here, you don't have the right, but these are the reasons by which your right to vote cannot be denied or abridged. Now let's put this into some simple examples for you. They had some things that were voting tests back in the day. Voting tests. And the idea was that if you were dealing with the newly freedmen, or for that matter, if you were dealing with poor whites, they wanted to give these tests with the expectation, with the idea in mind, that you would fail these tests. You would fail these tests, and then they could legally deny you the right to vote. Now let's put this into some context. The soap bubble test is one of the most basic ones. Now, I don't know if you're a bar soap person. I don't know if you're a body wash person. But the gist of it was that if you went in to go and vote back in the day, they would have a bar of soap that was there on the table, and they would ask, how many bubbles are in this bar of soap? Now think about this. How many bubbles are in this bar of soap? Think about the old Tootsie Roll Pop commercials. You remember when the little kid goes up to the owl and says, Mr. Owl, how many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Roll Pop? And the owl licks it once, he licks it twice, he licks it 3 times, and then he crunches, and he says it just takes 3 licks and gives the kid back the stick. There's certain questions that for whatever reason you just can't answer. Licks for a Tootsie Roll Pop or the number of bubbles that are actually going to be in a bar of soap are that way. No matter what answer you were to give as far as how many bubbles were in that bar of soap, there's no scientific way, because some of those bubbles are pretty small, to actually be able to count all of those. Which means no matter what answer you gave, you are not going to be allowed to vote. Now let's go back to our amendments. The newly freedmen shall have the right to vote. If you give somebody the soap bubble test, it doesn't matter. They've got the positive right to vote. But remember, the right of the citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. What this is saying is that you cannot deny somebody the ability to vote based on their race, their color, or their previous condition of servitude or slavery. Now think about this. Not knowing how many bubbles are in a bar of soap. Does that have anything to do with race? No. Does that have anything to do with color? No. Does that have anything to do with previous condition of servitude? No. It has to do with how many bubbles are actually in a bar of soap. You could legally deny somebody the right to vote because they couldn't answer that question. And in fact, you, with the bar of soap, wouldn't be able to answer the question. There was the jelly bean test. They would take a big jar of jelly beans and have them right there on the table. And when you walked up, they would ask you, how many jelly beans are in this jar? Now, they're not going to give you a chance to count it. You could look at it for a while, not be able to count all of the individual jelly beans. And in fact, many of the newly freedmen may not have been able to count that high anyway. But the gist of it is that whatever answer you gave them was probably going to be wrong. Again, if you were a newly freedman or if you were a poor white, they could deny you the right to vote. Let's go back to the amendments. The newly freedmen shall have the right to vote. Doesn't matter about the jelly beans. It's given you the positive right. Again, this wasn't the amendment that they wrote. The 15th Amendment that they did add, denying on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Are you being denied on account of your race? No. Are you being denied on account of your color? No. Are you being denied on account of your previous color or condition of servitude? No. You're being denied because you don't know how many jelly beans are actually in a jar. One of the other ones that they had given, they'd given the grandfather clause. The idea behind the grandfather clause, and this was a way to try and make sure that the whites could continue to vote, but in fact the newly freedmen couldn't. What they did as far as this was concerned is the question would be, if your grandfather could basically vote before 1866, could basically vote before the Civil War ended, then you would be allowed to vote as well. So when you think about it, if you were a white in the old colonial United States, when you think back to this, then indeed you're fine as far as this is concerned, because your grandfather was likely able to vote. But if you were a newly freedman, your grandfather was more than likely a slave. Now, are they denying you on account of your race? No. Are they denying you on account of your color? No. Are they denying you on your condition of servitude, previous condition of servitude? No. They're actually denying you on account of your grandfather's color, race, or previous condition of servitude, so they sidestepped the amendment. There were the poll taxes. The idea behind a poll tax, very simply, was you were going to have to pay a tax in order to be able to vote. Maybe it would be a few dollars. Maybe it would be $5. You go back about 150 years, though, and $5 is an awful lot of money. So again, the people that were well-to-do were going to be able to pay this very, very easily. And the people that were the newly freedmen, that in fact were just getting started with their new lives, probably weren't going to pay this. Are you denying them on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude? No, you're denying them on account of their ability to not pay the poll tax. One last one to think about, and I'll leave you with this one, and this was the literacy test. The idea behind the literacy test, and some people would argue that this needs to be done today. We don't just want anybody voting, but we want people that are educated voters, that know a little bit about the system, to be the ones that are actually voting. So the idea behind the literacy test is that we are going to give you a written passage. You are going to have to read and ultimately interpret this passage, and if you read and interpret it accurately, we're going to let you be able to vote. Now the trick on this was a couple of things. Number one, if I wanted you to vote, whether you were black or white or whatever you were, I would give you a pretty easy passage. Maybe something to the equivalent of green eggs and ham, and it's really difficult to mess up Dr. Seuss because they keep repeating the words and they rhyme over and over. But if I didn't want you to vote, I'm going to give you a very difficult passage. Maybe something that would be legal or constitutional. Maybe something that would be incredibly, incredibly difficult to follow. And the gist of it is that again, if you were black or if you were a poor white, I'd give you something you wouldn't be able to understand, and I would ban you from voting. Now think about this. The newly freedmen shall have the right to vote. I don't care if we're talking about the poll tax, or the literacy test, or the grandfather clause, or the jelly bean test, or any of the things that we've talked about. None of those tests would have actually banned you from being able to vote, because this gave you the positive right to be able to vote. But the 15th Amendment that they offered, if you can't read and understand according to the literacy test, this isn't based upon your race, color, or previous condition of servitude. This is based on your ability to comprehend and explain, and it was perfectly legal to ban people from voting, ultimately because of these tests. Again, they never gave this specific positive freedom or ability, responsibility, right, whatever you want to call it, to be able to vote. They gave you the reasons that you could not ban somebody from voting, but that just meant that there were a lot of legal ways to stop somebody from voting besides race, color, and previous condition of servitude.